Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Futures Frame TV Inequalities channel. I'm your host, Elise Krozer, and I'm here today with Raul Bravo Aduna. Raul is a journalist by education. He's currently the editor of the Economics and Society resort of Nexos Magazine in Mexico City. Nexos Magazine is all over Mexico, but we're here in Mexico City. Raul, nice to have you here. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for inviting me. I feel honored. So many amazing people have been in this show, and I'm just like nobody. But I'm very happy to be here and talk to you for a little bit.
Well, you might say that you think that you're nobody in relation to this. That's because people don't usually see you because you're the behind-the-scenes embellisher of all the texts that come out that we write, us inequalitists. You're basically the feather behind that makes them readable, right? I mean, you're the editor of many of the contributors to this channel and to your magazine writers. What is your secret in making us readable?
Oh wow, that is a very peculiar question. I think I wasn't expecting something like that, and I kind of love what you're saying of me being the little feather behind all of you guys. I wouldn't say that there's a secret in making you guys readable. I think there's a secret in acknowledging that any media outlet requires teamwork to properly flourish. The whole impulse behind economy and society when we started it about 5 years ago came from something very similar to what we're having right now. An interesting conversation after some beers at a pub, or well, a cantina, with some of these people who now are some of the greater inequalities of Mexico, like Diego Castañeda, like Luis Ángel Monroy, Carlos Brown. And it's such a shame that it has to be like male dominated, but it was
Used to be.
It used to be. No, actually, Economy and Society as a media outlet started with a very clear idea of equity, and we started with 50% female, 50% male authors. But let's say that the idea came from me listening to these guys, who of course were drunk, but were having fascinating conversations, tremendously interesting conversations about inequality, about trickle down economics, about economics as a fuel of knowledge and science. And I said, why on earth this not come across our public conversation? Economists are tremendously boring, some of them aside, of course, but it's boring and it's unintelligible and it's impossible to understand that it's marvelous, the science behind it, the principles that sort of sustain our world, the underlying principles that are sustaining everything that we're living in. And how is it possible that economists understand this and they are not communicating this like a conversation in a pub? And what I tried with them very, very much at the beginning, alongside great sociologists and great economists like Desi Schlosser, Jose Ignacio Lanzagorta, Carla Paniagua, Camila Paz Paredes, what I proposed to them was that they should aim at writing literary essays. Talking about economics, talking about sociology, but thinking in literary terms while writing. And who would have known? It worked. At the beginning, it was kind of tough to make them lose some of the academic and scholar jargon and some of the vices that one can find, of course, in every type of academic, technical writing. But it started working. I would say that was the secret or the magic ingredient: beer. And, of course, talking about it in colloquial, normal ways.
Making them get rid of their jargon. That was your feather, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're essentially the binding force behind, right? That brings all these people that think about different aspects of society, of the economy, of inequalities. You bring them together. And your resort has been fairly successful, I'd say. I mean, broadly speaking, there are more than 3 people reading. That's more than the author, the editor, and their mothers. So I guess that's a great success. How has the development been? How big is the resort now after those 5 years?
It's huge. And I'm not humble bragging. It was fascinating when I saw sort of like the tipping point of how Economía en Sociedad, or Economy and Society, was growing. We began publishing 4 essays a month. And back then, our first couple of months, we received around 2,000 unique visitors for the whole thing. Nowadays, Economía y Sociedad is scoring around 140,000 unique visitors every single month, meaning there's 140,000 people interested in inequality, interested in economics, interested in sociology. It's flabbergasting. Never in a million years I would have thought that was going to happen. There are some texts, one of you included, La Mentira de la Meritocracia, that have become sort of national bestsellers. And that
Interesting.
it is interesting. Of course, we cannot talk about best-selling articles because you know
We're not selling them.
yeah, we're not selling them. That's which sucks. Perhaps we should try selling them by the piece. But no, they've become sort of instant classics, and it's peculiar. I think it's the second time I've said peculiar. Every time I say it, if
We'll have a
someone,
beer
yeah,
afterwards, of course.
let's have a shot. No, but there's this phenomenon that's interesting behind some essays, some pieces that have been published there that every once in a while they become viral again. They went viral when they were published, but oftentimes they go viral again. And there's some that are just like they're becoming common knowledge. Again, I don't want to humble brag because it sounds horrible to say that my work is becoming common knowledge, or for that matter, your work is becoming common knowledge, but it sort of is. These phrases like la mentira meritocrática, it's something that's coming out of the bites of this blog or this section from people like you. And never in a million years I would have thought this was going to happen. Like, what I thought is that after 4 years or after 2 years, they would have said, like, okay, this was kind of useless. It's impossible to make people be interested in hardcore economics. You know, let's call it a day. And kind of the opposite happened. Like lightning struck. Honestly speaking, I still don't know what was it that made it so interesting. My hypothesis is that you guys are tremendously passionate about the topics you research, about how you write, about how you want to communicate and convey the things behind what you're doing. And up to some extent, this is going to sound perhaps lofty, but you guys want to win the battle. You guys want to win the public battle in terms of discourse. And that is fascinating. It's interesting. Whenever I read people like you, like Diego Castañeda, like Luis Angel, like
We're on this podcast as well. Just to remind you, watch the other episodes.
watch the other episodes. I'm pretty sure they must be way more interesting than me and what they said. Paloma Villagomez, man, it's unbelievable. Like, my only point of comparison is someone like Albert Hirschman. And it's insane to say it because I do believe that Albert Hirschman is the best writer ever in terms of economics as a field of knowledge. But it's like that. It's so huge what they're trying to do. And simultaneously, it's so palatable and interesting and fun and funny. And you're always looking for ways to convey these things. So, of course, passion comes into the mix to make everything just sort of be magical. In this case, I kind of just think that we only needed like someone who was curious enough or wanted to learn a little bit more about all of this to try to propel it. But the way it has developed is, for me, it's unbelievable. Pretty sure there must be someone saying like, ah, man, you're not all that in a bag of potato chips, but I do think we are all that in a bag of potato chips, and it's fascinating. I think that's again how it has developed. Passion has a funny way of trumping logic, I think.
Well, and we probably also needed the right translator, right? That's basically your job, bring this abstract, scientific and technical and boring discourse to people and make them interested. Because maybe one of the changes is also, I don't know how you see that, is that society or people in general, let's say, became interested in these topics. I mean, way beyond whatever any of us who contribute to this magazine would be able to get them interested, right?
That is true. The latter part, there's been a big shift in terms of perception, being interested about these topics. One of the things I'm just fascinated about these last couple of years is that sociologists like Thorsten Veblen all of a sudden are cool again. You know? What?
Veblen 100 years ago, and
Yes.
now he's back.
Now he's back, but of course he was gonna be back again. It was gonna be common knowledge once again, to talk about conspicuous consumption, for example. I think that's part of the magic or the rush of these times in terms of inequality as part of the public discourse, and of course how younger people are making that part of their own individuality, part of their own personality, and that's fascinating on its own. Talking about me translating the authors into Spanish, I would have said that was the case 5 years ago. Truth be told, with my, let's say, pool of contributors that are a part of economy and society, which is just about 8 people, yourself included. Truth be told, that my job there is not translating you guys anymore, or not that much. I have to change some commas here and there. I have to change some words every now and then. The job has become way more interesting. It has become drinking beer and having food every 2 months, right?
When
That's
pandemic permits.
when the pandemic used to permit it. But the job evolved. I can't remember the last time I had to actually ask for rewrites on a text of one of my, again, core contributors in a lot of time. But it's because the job has become way more fascinating. It's
Yeah,
sitting
you
down.
trained us.
That sounds beautiful. I don't know if that's the case, but the job has become to sit down and listen to you and sort of be a mediator in terms of, making you sit down there once a month for 3 hours and discuss and also have fun. And that's what's interesting. And I think that's something that Economía y Sociedad has done really well. If I want to be like grandiose about this, it's sort of like the coffee shops in London in the 18th century. Fascinating things happen when fascinating people are put together. That's it. You put together two things that never been put together before, and voila, you've got magic. And that's the case with you guys. Of course, some of you were already friends before being a part of this pool of contributors. Some of you do different things on your own, together, separately, and the likes. But it's something that has become paramount to Economía y Sociedad means, and that is that knowledge is being, there's generosity behind the sharing of this knowledge. Coming back to the question, the job change, and I don't have to translate any of you guys. I've become a way more interesting editor. I get to listen to you and just push a little bit towards ideas I think that perhaps are going to suit you. Say that I think that something is a bad idea when I do think so, but this has been the case.
And enforce the deadlines.
Enforce the deadlines, of course, but but also, for example, something that I've learned to do is to step back. I'm not the kind of editor who wants the authors to write what I want them to write, but rather to just sort of enhance whatever it is that they want to say as much as I can. But that has come even to some points in which there have been some pieces that I thought that we should not have published, that should not have been written, but nevertheless understood why they had to be written and why they had to be published. And when those reasons are set, when they are discussed, when they are deliberated, that is part of it, of saying, you know what, you economists think this is interesting. I think you are interesting. I know you're making a mistake, but fuck it, let's do it. You feel that's interesting, let's go with your gut. So that's been part of the job as well, and I'm just honored to be like close to these amazing people, I guess.
We're all very honored to work with you. um, what do you think is the role of Economía y Sociedad in society, larger speaking? I mean, it's one of the few places where there is so much combined, let's say, so much information on precisely topics of inequality, of social inequalities, economic inequality, etc. How do you think it could impact inequality, or can we have an impact on the situation of inequality in the country?
No.
That's very honest and very pessimistic. Thank you.
No, as I'm a huge believer in pedagogy and didactics and the role of information and knowledge in any democracy, it would be stupid on my behalf to think that some amazing essays can change the world or inequality as we speak right now. The power of something like Economía y Sociedad, I think that lies in acknowledging that it's not going to happen. We are not going to change the world with 1,200 words of copy. But we're going to leave the archive there for us meaning like humans, Mexicans, the universe, or whatever. The archive's gonna be there for whenever it's needed. And that's what I'm a true believer of. The archive is there. The analysis, the description, the sociological imagination behind some of the better pieces that we've published in this last 5 years, that archive is going to be there for whenever it's needed, for whenever we need an understanding of the differences of southern and northern Mexico, whenever there's a need to understand how effed up the elites in Mexico City, where your work's going to be there. Whenever the fourth industrial revolution comes along and destroys everything that we do, Carlos Brown, Luis Angel Monroy's assessment of that phenomena. And it's going to be there ready for whomever is willing to try to understand a little bit more. What Paloma does with food inequality is mind blowing. I think it doesn't go more than a couple of weeks in my life when I don't want to reread something written by you guys, and the archive's going to be there. We're not going to save the world from inequality. Of course not. Inequality is going to get worse, most likely, with everything that's going on in 2020. There's no escape of this. There's going to be bigger winners and bigger losers as an outcome of everything that we're experiencing right now. But
things happening in 2020. You're talking about the water they found on Mars, and now Martians coming to visit us, or what is the background there?
Hopefully, the great lockdown, the global pandemic, the international sanitary emergency we're in the amidst what we're living. Everything's going to get worse. Yes, definitely. But perhaps it's kind of a fool's counsel, but the archive's going to be there, We're setting things for whomever wants them whenever they are ready. And that's something that I love about pieces like the ones you've written about the lies behind the meritocracy or the meritocratic ideals. People sort of eventually get enlightened and they start sharing Alice Crosser's words to try to convert other meritocrats. And that's part of it. I'm a true believer of the archive. I don't want the one hit wonders. I hate the one hit wonders. I hate everyday analysis. I'm a huge fan of people like Hirschman, of people like Mills, people like Susan Sontag. I'm a huge believer of this is going to sound so stupid, but thinking that eventually we're going to be smart enough as a collective to go back and take a good look at the things that were being researched and said. And I hate everyday politics. I hate everyday economics. I find them useless and boring, and perhaps that's why I am useless and boring. But I believe in that. I believe that your essays will be read in Mexico in 100 years from now, and we're going to think of the great problems of Mexico in terms of foretelling archaeology, if that makes sense, that you guys are building, and it's there, and I'm a part of it, and it's beautiful, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does. I think it does. I'm wondering what gives you this optimism in your very pessimist position of us not understanding now. How do you think we as a collective, to be able to understand these important questions in the future? I mean, questions of social inequality, of environmental risk, of all the dangers that are afflicting us now and will in the future. What does it need for us to get there?
Oh dear, no! If I had answers to those questions, I would live in a mansion in Malibu, maybe.
Do you
Um,
think they pay?
yeah, maybe not, right? I realized that I was stealing someone else's ideas at the end of what I was saying like 30 seconds ago. There's this fascinating book called Archaeologies of the Future, written by Frederick Jameson. It's a very thorough, exhaustive analysis of the late capitalist logics behind science fiction. And he goes on to punch in the face this very classical argument that, or idea, that science fiction predicts the future. Like, oh my God, how is E.M. Forster capable of predicting Twitter? You know, how was Mary Shelley capable of predicting the use of lightning and thunder? And what Jameson says is that it's stupid to say that, basically. Very simply put, because our imagination cannot go beyond the means we've got next to us. You know, the prediction of the future is 90% our everyday technology and perhaps 10% variation of that. In those terms, I think that life has become so complex that it's impossible to try to even figure out one tiny bit of it. Not to mention like systemic problems that I don't know what experts would say, but when I think of climate change and when I think of the environmental crisis, I don't see an escape. I can see some things that like diminish the problem, dim it a little bit, palliate it, but it's kind of impossible to imagine a comprehensive, complex, systemic way to tackle these problems, right? I'm guessing that what's going to be needed eventually is, again, the archive. Perhaps not to solve them, but to understand a little bit how we got to where we got and how it was that we've effed up even more along the way. I can very easily see some inequalities revisionists in 70 years from now saying like, see, these guys were saying it, these guys were like Thorsten Veblen, like how on earth nobody talked about conspicuous consumption for 100 years? How is that possible? How is conspicuous consumption something that didn't become common knowledge until 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I
So
don't
we're
know.
all doomed.
Basically, yeah, but that's part of the experience, I guess.
The experience of being alive.
We're humans, yeah. We have fun, and then we find ways to make it better, and then we make it worse again. And hopefully, every now and then, we find ways to make our collective experience better a little bit. You know, history is not on our side to say this, of course, but little by little. I don't know if there's any sort of expression like this in the English language, but gallo gallina, pollito, you know?
Small
Take
steps.
that. Small steps. That's it. We hope for the better, knowing that most likely the worst will be the more probable outcome. And still, there should be some sort of hope behind that. And in the end, that's what socializing knowledge and what the scientific impulse is all about. I know it's the most horrible cliche in the history of humanity, but it's like this letter that Isaac Newton wrote to one of his friends on a gloomy December night, right? If I've been able to do everything I've done, it's because I've been standing on the shoulders of giants. That's it. We're midgets, right? But we're contributing to that giant, and hopefully, one day, a big difference can be made, even if I don't believe so.
Even if you don't believe so, what does give you, Raul, hope that will change?
That life will change for the better? Oh, dear God. My mother, my girlfriend, you guys, my friends. I'm a huge believer in friendship, and I'm a huge believer of being as generous as one can. And quoting the Titan of Titans, Albert Hirschman, he's got these amazing letters written to one of his best friends, an Italian philosopher. In every single letter he wrote to his friend, he would say, "We're gonna prove Hamlet wrong." You know, this idea that if you think and think and think and think and think, eventually you're just gonna be killed, and you're gonna let everyone around you be killed, and nothing's gonna happen. Hirschman was a huge believer that thinking should eventually become action and should eventually be turned into small steps towards making things a little bit better. My hope comes from that. My hope comes from a Wednesday afternoon drinking beer, having Vienna sausages with my friends, and discussing that things can be a little bit better. On its own, I think that that is powerful. And this might sound as a contradiction to everything I was saying before, but maybe not. Maybe in the end, I'm a true believer of generosity, of friendship, and hope.
Sharing.
Sharing. My kindergarten teacher used to say, "Sharing is caring." Yes, 1,000 times yes. And that's why it's so beautiful working the way you, because you're the stars here, or there. You share your insights, your knowledge, your brilliance, your wisdom. Yeah, that gives me hope. You, Alice Krozer, and Luis Ángel Monroy, and Paloma Villagomez, and Carla Paniagua, and Carlos Brown, and all the fallen soldiers like Desi Schlosser, Camila Paz Paredes, Fer Gutierrez Amaro, José Ignacio Lanzagorta. I really don't want to miss anyone. Máximo Jaramillo, Sofía Mosqueda. Like those are the people that give me. That's what gives me hope. The generosity of a handful of people, I think, can be revolutionary enough.
Raul, we thank you very much for your very pessimistic and well, somewhat hopeful outlook on the world. I'd like to ask you one more question before we come to close. Do you think there is an inequality in humor?
Oh wow, yeah, definitely. It's one of the worst possible. Well, not one of the worst, of course. No, it's a very terrible type of inequality when you consider what people is allowed to or not to make fun of. And I'm not saying it in terms of this stupid defense of humor for humor's sake, like everyone is allowed to make a joke of whatever they want. And I truly believe it's not the case. And that's precisely the inequality behind it. Yeah, a white heterosexual man, of course, can make fun of everything. His life is not horrible. His life has not been crossed by all these different types of inequalities: race, gender, economic, even in terms of social distinction inequalities. Of course, he thinks that it's funny to make fun of yourself, but it's impossible to think how a black person from Compton who lived through the 80s and the 90s as a kid, who's been at point of gun more times than any of us in our entire families will ever be by the age of 11 or 12. Yes, of course, it's impossible to think that they can make fun of that. And if they can, it has to be up to some extent, their pain. Their pain has to be transformed by their narrative. I was not a huge fan of Hannah Gadsby's Netflix comedy special, but there was a lot of truth behind what she was saying. When she says something like, I was fed up of using myself as an excuse to not see how fucked up the world around me was. There's a lot of wisdom behind that. And I think it's the inequality in humor, both when penning it, when filming it, representing it, etc. It's one of the most delicate subjects ever. There's this fascinating example of one of the finest pieces of humor I've read in the last couple of years. There's this book called The Sellout. It was written by a black author from Compton, precisely, called Paul Beatty. It won the Man Booker Prize a few years ago. And The Sellout is a hilarious novel in which a black person finds that the problem to inequality in the greater LA area will be solved by racial segregation installed back again in the LA greater area, and again against black people. And that black person inside the novel, he called himself a nigger whisperer, basically someone that translates what niggers believe and turns that into something that's understandable and palatable for white people. He believes that slave will power, once again, the economy of these very forgotten places of LA. I have no idea how he does it, but there's not one single page you're not laughing out loud while cringing at yourself while doing so. Now, there are two reasons as to why that novel works. Firstly, because Paul Beatty properly understands what it was like to grow up in a situation like that. Secondly, because it was written in 2016, not in 1989. 1989, Compton needed NWA, Niggers with Attitude. It needed Fuck the Police as an anthem. It needed Straight Out of Compton as an anthem. Something like that published in 1989, it would have been a disgrace, distasteful, like even impossible to conceptualize it. In 2016, Paul Beatty can reinterpret his pain, reinterpret his context, and even acknowledging the problems that still are underlying a neighborhood like Compton. The complexity behind that is, for me, unimaginable, or at least impossible to make it understandable. Like if the book weren't written, I would not be able to conceptualize it. I don't know if that makes sense, but a little bit behind these mechanisms of humor, I think lies some of those answers that for me are right now impossible to get to. Up until 7 or 8 years ago, I was a huge fender of humor for humor's sake. I was a huge fan of Woody Allen. Yes, of course I were. I was a huge fan of Ian Fraser. But it turns out that pain is painful. That's sort of like the glory of the 2010s and right now the 2020s, right? We've realized that pain is painful. That what women, what minorities, what everyone who's struck by any type of inequality, like, yeah, what a surprise, right? It turned out that it was painful, that it was horrible, and that none of us have been fair to how complex those lives, I guess, are.
I'm thinking whether that means that humor can also then be like a uniting force. To some degree, if you say that you can relate to a very different experience, even if it is through this painful laughter, maybe it has the potential to create empathy towards the other that you
Yeah.
hadn't had before, right?
Maybe,
I'm
maybe.
trying to end on a positive note.
No, let's
Don't
end on
give
a
me
perfect.
maybe.
Let's end on a positive note. Yes, we can be empathetic. and we can learn to be more empathetic by listening and by being more generous with our understanding of the other. And in that sense, I would say that perhaps rather than being empathetic, I would say that we should give sympathy, not understand the other person's pain, but to give something of us to try to we can take a sad song and make it better, right? I guess given sympathy might be a great outcome of how humor and these things are changed in the last couple of years, or at least the common understanding of it. Yeah, we should be sympathetic to whomever's in front of us. Try to give a little bit of what we've got, so we can make the other person's day like this better, and that's it. There's no need for anything else.
Thank you, Raul Bravo, for these insightful and somewhat sad and somewhat hopeful comments on the current situation and the role that editing and magazines might have to ameliorate or not social inequalities, at least to leave an archive for us to make it better in the future. We hope that you liked this episode, and if you did, join us again next Saturday for another episode of Futures Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel. Have a nice afternoon. Goodbye. Thank you.